Okay, so I got home from work today after stopping by the grocery to grab something to eat. I fell asleep until like 12. Uh, After I ate, so it was like 7 to 12 or so. And this is my fourth or fifth take, I think. Looks like my fifth take. Trying to do something about music. So um, there are like a couple things I know I want to say, and I keep like kind of messing everything else up. The big thing I want to say is that I'm very highly classically trained. I've been classically trained for 17 years. Um, and I've studied jazz for probably 9 years, 9 of those years. Like, I've studied Bud Powell and Charlie Parker and Clifford Brown. I've studied Stravinsky and Beethoven and Bartok. And I think, in spite of all that training, I think what I really like the best, like what I really like to listen to, is rock and roll. And what I want to kind of approach, I think, is what is rock and roll? I mean, what really is it? I mean, okay, so Kid A, Radiohead, The Bends, that to me is rock and roll. Radiohead Kid A, next album in their discography, not really rock and roll. And what's the difference? How much? Of course, you can't say, well, any rock and roll album that uses electronics or any album that uses electronics isn't rock and roll. You can't say that. But then at the same time, you can't say. You can't say like Flaming Lips, like when you listen the Yoshimi album, like doesn't sound like rock and roll to me. It's there's the beat is held by a drum machine and is extremely spastic and sort of what I would call like jungle or drum and bassy. I guess like the two things that usually really we think like when I think of rock and roll that I think of are having a backbeat and the instrumentation, guitar, bass, and drums, electric guitar or electric bass and drums. Now, like that can vary a little bit. Like I think like some of Tom Waits stuff is rock and roll, and he uses usually an upright bass. Um, I don't know. I mean, if you think about there are bands that have really used, there are rock and roll bands that have really made a lot of use of the acoustic guitar. So I guess like I think that's sort of where we're at these days with rock and roll music. Is like we don't know exactly what rock and roll is anymore because and I think, but at the same time, like there are people still making rock and roll, and Neil Young and all that. Rock and roll is here to stay. Rock and roll will never die, and it hasn't. Um, but one of the real issues I think in rock and roll today is that the technology that they can do in the studio, things they can do in the studio are so advanced. That um, sometimes the technology takes over, and there is no really. I don't know. There's nobody even plays an instrument. If you look at it's become fabulously easy to fake guitar sounds and to program whatever guitar licks and all this crap, and sometimes you listen to an album and it's just a cut and paste to different sequences, and there's actually no instruments played at all. um, and then there's nothing wrong with electronic music. I like some electronic music, but what I really really like is rock and roll. Electronic music is not my favorite form of music. Rock and roll is. So like so how so the but at the same time, like, so here I am kind of like, yeah, I'm being kind of negative, but in spite of the fact that I think we have a problem, it's like, okay, well, what do we define rock and roll as today? Is Tool rock and roll? It's not to me. It is to some people, though. Was Soundgarden rock and roll? Not to me, but to some people. So like So, even though we have trouble defining it, we can argue about what bands fit and what don't. You know, who are the real descendants of Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley and Howlin' Wolf and all those people, and who aren't. But we can argue these things, but like in the end, like I don't know that I've ever seen like a really stable definition, even in those like textbooks, you know, history of rock and roll, like Sinclair Community College, whatever. You don't see like I've never seen a solid definition of what rock and roll really is. But in spite of the fact that we don't know what it is, I think rock and roll is in good shape today. I think I'm really like heartened, you know, like there are a lot of bands out there that like can play live, that are interested in, you know, playing interesting music, that are aware of the roots of rock and roll, you know, that use the technology that's available, which again is very advanced and can do just about anything you want it to do, except for mimic a human being perfectly. You know, like, well, that's the whole thing. I mean, like, a human can play guitar a certain way, and a computer can mimic the sound of someone playing, but it can't actually play the way a human being plays, particularly somebody who has a lot of skill at playing with good feel, which feel is really important in music. I mean, like in classical music, like it's kind of the point. I mean, in contemporary music, like you want to play mathematically perfectly, so it's almost like, well, why don't we just program this score? I mean, why bother playing it? And in jazz, it's completely the opposite. Although I must say, like the number of players that I hear on in jazz today that have good feel are like really small. But I mean, feel is everything in jazz. You know, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing and all that. And then in rock, feel is also really important. And you know, like there are like bands like MC5 or Iggy Pop and the Stooges that had a real straight feel. And then there were bands like the Rolling Stones or the Band that had a real like kind of loose feel. But you know, but a computer doesn't really synthesize feel very well. It, you know, they've tried to do it and they just can't. The human being can still play an instrument better, really, than a computer can. You may not be able to do like the fabulous things a computer can do, most, but the human is still the better of the two players, so to speak. Okay, so I'm running out of time, and I, as usual tonight, I've not gotten anywhere with this. But the two things I wanted to emphasize were rock and roll is in good shape today. There are people out there making good music, and two, you know, support people that actually play their instruments. That actually like, you know, it's a waste of time to listen to a robot sing a song and a robot play a guitar. And when you find, the people that are making real good music are people that can play instruments better than you can program a synthesizer.